Welcome in. We are College Football Overtime, and we are here to get you ready for all of the Week 11 matchups across college football. We're going to be hitting on the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, all of the big ones. We got a bunch of them, and Abe Gordon is joining me here at Abe Gordon on Twitter, at GChapATL for me on Twitter /X/ whatever it's called. I don't really know, but that's not the point because we're here to talk college football, Abe. We have multiple games across college football that will go long ways in deciding who wins the SEC, who even represents the conference in the title game. We go up to the Big Ten East, a critical matchup between Penn State and Michigan. Really the first big test for Michigan. We're going to get into all of that right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. We're also going to jump into some college football playoff reactions. On Tuesday, we had the second edition of the College Football Playoff poll come out. Not a lot of change really at all, if any, really. I mean, I think we have two new top 10 teams, or two new teams, or one new team in the top 10, one team that fell out. We'll get into all of that right here on College Football Overtime. But before we do any of that, I got to introduce my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. It's kind of crazy. We're finally here. This is a week, and I look ahead at the schedules all the time for various reasons. This is the week that I pinpointed like a month and a half ago that I'm like, man, this might be the week that really separates a couple conferences, and it really could turn out that way. Now, a couple of games that I looked at and I was like, man, that's going to be the one. Maybe not as much, but boy, oh boy, is it loaded all across the country. Every conference, maybe with the exception of the Big 12, I guess, has a game that really sticks out as this could be a big step forward towards a playoff position. So this is one of the weeks that I have absolutely pinpointed. It's finally here, and I am ready for it to deliver.
Absolutely. Utah travels to go play Washington. Don't fall asleep on some of these games in the Big 12, though. I mean, UCF, an upstart team that likes to score a lot of points. I don't know how they haven't fared too well in Big 12 action, but they're playing a team in Oklahoma State that, look, they're top 15 in the poll right now, and they're looking to go play in the Big 12 title game against Texas, and Texas is playing TCU, a team that played there last year. So it's very interesting games across the board, but we're going to hit those big ones. We're going to touch on a lot of these other games as we go along. But, Abe, I do want to start here because the college football playoff just emerged, and not a lot of change. Ohio State is still your top team in the country. Georgia's number 2, Michigan number 3, Florida State number 4, Washington is number 5. They round out your undefeated teams. Before we get into the other ones, are you surprised about no change at all in your top 5?
I am a little bit surprised. I thought Washington, by beating a ranked team on the road, would have reason to be placed ahead of Florida State. And I do think that Georgia adding another top 15 win, albeit mildly unimpressively, albeit at home, would have been enough to get them to jump Ohio State. Now, I'm not overly surprised. Like, I'm not like ready to throw a tantrum about it. Again, I said it last week. This time I'll say it again. I think if Georgia wins this weekend, we'll get into this game in a little bit. Another top 15 win, albeit at home. More reason to try and look at potentially jumping them. Same thing for Washington. I just think at some point you do start to add up these top 15 or top 20 wins, whether it's home or on the road, and start your argument. But the resumes for some of these teams are getting different. You know, people are downgrading certain wins that Florida State has had. If Penn State loses to Michigan, a game we'll discuss when we go around the nation, do we downgrade the win that Ohio State had over them? Notre Dame, that win, does that get downgraded because of how they looked this past week against Clemson? I mean, there's a lot of variables at play here. I was surprised Ohio State kept 1. I was surprised Florida State kept 4. It's not the biggest deal in the world. I'm not going to throw a tantrum over it, but I did think there would be some movement. So I was a little bit surprised that there wasn't.
See, the biggest thing for me is that the thing that became increasingly evident is that it appears that the playoff committee has frozen the wins in time, if you will.
Right.
The win against Notre Dame, of course, everything changes, and context is very important in all of this. Ohio State's win over Notre Dame was a lot more impressive that week than it is even now.
And honestly, same thing for Florida State and LSU.
you could say the same. Well, not to the same degree necessarily. I mean, but not as much as it would be a 3-loss Notre Dame team who just lost to Clemson on the road. And
Right.
I don't know. I think LSU has gotten better as the season has gone along, even though they have 3 losses now. Those 3 losses that they have come at the hands of Alabama on the road, at Ole Miss on the road, Florida State away from home. Not technically a road game per se. It was played in a neutral site. But I don't really want to put them in that same category necessarily. But I will say, if you're Washington, the win against USC just elevated their strength of record metric. And yet they aren't that isn't reflected in the polls. And again, I agree with you. I'm not going to cry over spilled milk. None of this really matters at this point. It just is just a snapshot of where the teams stand currently. And people like to prognosticate and turn it into something that, well, if this happens and that happens and then this happens, and okay, great. There's still a month's worth of games to play, not even including your conference title games, because we can get into scenario after scenario after scenario, and I could scream until I'm blue in the face. That doesn't change the fact that we still got to play the games on the field, and at the end of the day, this is going to be our lead story. It needs to be the lead story because this is what college football is now. I mean, we were all about the playoffs and everything else. I love the football on the actual action on the field. We're going to get into a lot of those discussions here in just a little bit, but I do want to move into these 1-loss teams.
Yeah,
because you have Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Penn State and Louisville, who are all really talented teams. And I think many of these teams have gotten better as the season's gone on, with a few exceptions. One of those is Ole Miss, a team that's traveling to Athens this weekend. I think that they are playing themselves into a potential upset potential against Georgia, first and foremost. But as far as the committee goes, they have the head-to-head loss against Alabama. You have the head who also has the head-to-head loss against Texas. I think that has become increasingly evident that they are reflecting that in this poll, which I think is fine. But of these teams, which of them do you see being able to play their way up into a potential playoff bid?
Alabama. I was very impressed with how their offense looked a week ago. We talked about it on our Monday edition of College Football Overtime. Maybe they figured it out with Jalen Milroe. We'll get more into what we expect from their offense this week when we go around the SEC here in a couple minutes, because I have some thoughts on how they need to follow that up. But Alabama's the one for me. They're going to get the head-to-head with Georgia, assuming the track holds.
Yeah.
Georgia takes care of business against Ole Miss, Tennessee on the road, and Georgia Tech on the road, assuming Alabama takes care of Auburn in the Iron Bowl, Kentucky this week, and I think they have a bum in between those two games. But that's the one to me. Their defense is elite enough. If their offense is on track like they have been, I don't think it's as far-fetched as I once thought for them to be able to upset Georgia. So that's the one I would keep an eye on. More so than Texas. Oregon obviously is still in the discussion.
Yeah.
I would place them above Alabama, but I would take Alabama over Texas in terms of most likely.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of very interesting teams as far as these 1 losses go. Louisville's right there. They could go win the ACC title game. I don't think that would be
how you lost and
necessarily.
who you lost to. There's so much needs to happen. For
I mean, the loss to Pittsburgh is pretty brutal.
It was a bad loss. Yeah.
It's a bad loss for Louisville. I think it's going to affect them down the road. But they can win some style points, and they're clearly seen as the lowest of the 1-loss teams, and I think that's probably pretty accurate. Penn State, I'm interested you didn't say them. They have a very good opportunity at home against Michigan on Saturday, and if they get a win there, I would not be surprised if you see them skyrocket up to 6 or 7.
It's just more far-fetched to me that they're going to beat Michigan and win a Big Ten title game than it is for Alabama. I just think Alabama's got a real clear path where it seems likely that they're 11-1 facing Georgia, and
that's fair.
Who knows at that point?
But there's also the element of they've been there, they've done that. I mean, it's
part of it.
Very recognized brand across college football, especially for the Nick Saban era. I mean, the dynasty, it's far from dead. I know Chris Marler, a friend of the program, likes to he had a common expression. He's on Twitter. If you've never checked it out, you should. He used to say, if you're going to dance on the grave of Nick Saban in Alabama, tread lightly. It's pretty accurate, and it's proven evident so far this season. They've had a splendid second half of their year after looking like roadkill at times, especially against the likes of South Florida, the loss at Texas, or against Texas, I should say. They've looked pretty bad in Hapless at times. I think they've looked like a much better unit as of late. A lot of that has to do with the play of Jalen Milroe, the quarterback. The rushing attack has looked pretty effective. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about. We talked a little bit more about this on our reaction show that came out on Monday. So if you missed that, go check that out. It's up here on the YouTube page. It's all over wherever you get your podcasts. College football overtime. Make sure you check that out. Did you have any more thoughts on these one-loss teams? Mute. I think you're still on mute, my friend.
I did find it interesting. Yeah, sorry. The dog, we heard her last episode.
Man.
We're trying to clear that up. But
she's just looking for a feature, man. It's all good.
I did find it interesting, and you mentioned it earlier, and I think it just doubly confirms what you're saying, that head-to-head is more important seemingly this year than it has been. Mm-hmm. I think there could have been cause to have Texas fall behind Alabama. They chose not to do that. I'm perfectly accepting of that, but I think it is another statement in regards to head-to-head.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this, Ole Miss is a very interesting team. I think they have the loss at Alabama, which is going to weigh heavily on them. They need a bit of a miracle, I'd say, to jump in Alabama here because they won't have the head-to-head, and they won't have the conference championship game, assuming Alabama takes care of business this weekend on the road against Kentucky, which I'm assuming that they will. They'll have two opportunities to do that. To at least to clinch, and they first opportunity will be against Kentucky. I think they'll do that this weekend. But, on that note, we're going to get into our Across the SEC segment, Abe. And I might as well start right there. I know we have our headliner with Georgia, but I feel like the segue just works too well right here. Alabama's looking to clinch the SEC West. They'll do so likely against Kentucky this weekend. I think the only way that we don't see this happen for Alabama is if Devin Leary just goes freak mode and he just continues to play at a high level. I mean, he's looked a lot better in recent contests. Maybe he's figured something out. He'll have to be Superman in this game because I don't think Davis is necessarily going to have the game of his life because Alabama, that front seven has really, really done a good job of stifling rushing attacks.
Yeah, for me, this is all about Alabama, and it's just about backing up and reconfirming what they showed against LSU. Did Nick Saban actually unlock Jalen Milroe in that offense? Is this now that Alabama team we've seen in years past where the defense is a top 10 unit, but you're also talking about 35, 40, 45 points a game? And that's what made them so tough to defeat for so long. There was a stretch this season where it's like, I don't know, this team's going to get 24 points in SEC competition. I need to see them back it up. I need to see them repeat the effort. And look, Kentucky's much better defensively as compared to LSU. And so I think it is, look, I don't think they're in danger of losing this game, but I think it is a good test and a good barometer to just see if last week's Alabama offense is real or if it was a mirage. Because if it was real, Georgia has something real to worry about come the SEC championship. Not looking too far ahead for them. They've got some other games in the way, but it's a different discussion. It will be heading into that game. That's what I'm looking for out of this. I expect Alabama to win, whether it's ugly or whether it's pretty. But, man, if they drop another 40 spot on this Kentucky defense on the road, I think it is a look out below situation because they might be right back at the top of the heap in very short order.
Yeah, and I think they figured some stuff out on the rushing attack. Jace McClellan just continues to be a steady hand in the rushing attack. He's been a pretty good thing for that Alabama offense. But you nailed it. It's Jalen Milroe.
Yeah.
The offense was only going to go as far as he took it at the end of the day. And I think on Saturday, the game against LSU, they unlocked a different piece of his game, which maybe he had the whole time, which I'm assuming he really did have the whole time. It's not.
I do wonder if they were saving it for. Yeah, I was wondering if they were saving it for this sort of affair. But boy, they played some ugly, close, competitive games to hold back on it. But if that's how they played it, kudos to them.
Yeah, and look, I don't expect that Kentucky's going to give them much of an argument here. Just because the way that Kentucky plays just sort of feeds right into what Alabama wants to do on offense and on defense. It's a very similar type of contest to what it is when Kentucky plays Georgia every year. Kentucky's a good football team. I think Kentucky would give a lot of teams a great game. We saw that against Tennessee. We saw what they did against Florida. Look, we've seen them play at a high level. when you play you try to
it's a bad
team that's more
matchup.
physical than you.
Yeah, Alabama does too well what Kentucky hopes to do.
Yes.
It's just a bad matchup.
And then you add in the talent factor, and it's just too
Yeah.
much. But it would take a heroic effort from Devin Leary. But I want to move on. Tennessee at Missouri, a sneakily very good football game. Not even sneakily, just a good football game. I'd say this has potential to be one of the best matchups of the week. I don't know about you, but I think this comes down to which team relies on their quarterback less to win them the football game. And that's not a knock on Brady Cook or on on Joe Milton, because I think they're both good quarterbacks in their own right. I think Milton he limits what the offense wants to do a little bit more than I think Brady Cook does. But I think it's more just a credit to the identities of what these teams like to do. Cody Schrader showed last week that he is a force to be reckoned with on the ground. He's 919 yards rushing. I want to say he's top 15 in FBS. He also has 10 touchdowns. He's going up against a front seven that allows 99 yards per game. But one more thing on Cody Schrader. I said this on the show on Saturday, College Football Game Time. Find it also wherever you get your podcasts, or tune in on the Audacy app. Every single Saturday morning, we're getting you ready on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. But one thing that he does very, very well in the first halves of games, he's a good steady hand, about 3.5 to 4.5 yards per carry. That yards per carry ticks all the way up to about 6.5 yards per carry. I said that was going to be a big key on Saturday, and it almost was against Georgia, a team that is very effective against running backs in particular. And he had a pretty good day against probably the best front seven in football. And he's going to have another tough test on Saturday. And on the other side, you have Jalen Wright, who really got taken out of the game when he played against Alabama. But outside of that performance, he's been very good. He's a good player. And I think both of these teams have good enough defenses. Tennessee, I think, has the edge there, which is why I think that they have the edge in this football game overall. But both have strong rushing attacks, and they will want to lean on that and see what the quarterbacks can do. So just don't make mistakes if you're the quarterback.
Yeah, I'm on the other side of this, to be honest. I know you mentioned you think Tennessee has an edge. I think Missouri has an edge. Missouri proved a lot to me in a loss to Georgia. This is a legitimate top 15 team, which, look, I've seen a lot of top-ranked teams come into UGA, and I was like, I don't really buy it. We saw it with Arkansas. We saw it with Kentucky.
Yeah.
To an extent, even Tennessee last year. They deserved to be ranked highly, but they were never the best team in the country. We knew that. This is a legitimate Missouri team. They were very good. They should have some confidence. And I'll tell you what, I think Joe Milton is in some trouble in this one. This is a very good pass rush for the Missouri Tigers. They got to Carson back 3 times. He had only been sacked 6 times coming in all season for the Georgia Bulldogs in that loss a week ago. I think even a loss, they built some real confidence. The one question I would have is Luther Burden. How limited was he in the second half because of what looked like an ankle injury? And does that carry over? Because he had the touchdown. He caught a 2-point conversion, but we're talking, if my memory serves, 3 catches and 53 yards for
all on the first drive.
Right. And that's not going to be enough. If he's healthy, I think he can get after it. Total different ball game, though, if he's limited. And I think you talked to Schrader and the importance there. Brady Cook was very good a week ago. And I know he threw 2 interceptions late in the game as they were trying to mount a semblance of a comeback, and it didn't happen for him. He's a very good quarterback. This is a very good Missouri team. It is a home game for them. I think they can get after Milton and really put them in some tough situations with 3rd and long, stuff like that. I think Missouri has an edge in this one. But like you said, this is a very legitimate top 15 matchup. I'm very excited to see this one play out.
Yeah, and you talk about implications of this game in particular. The winner of this game is assured of the number 2 spot in the SEC East. If you're Tennessee, you have the chance. If you win this football game, you then have
you're potentially hosting Georgia. Yeah,
coming to Neyland Stadium the next week with the SEC East on the line, assuming that they lose. So you have the 3:30 game. That's the CBS game of the week, and then at 7:00. That gets into the Georgia and Ole Miss, which is the nightcap of the evening, which I think is the game of the week in the SEC. So let's move into that one, because if Georgia loses that game, you have a potential winner-take-all in Neyland Stadium up in Knoxville, where I think the roof will blow off, just because we saw what it was last year when Alabama came up there to go play. But will they get into that situation? Because not even just like that result aside, Georgia has a chance to just put away the SEC East and just be done with it. But coming into town is a very prolific offense led by Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, Quinshon Judkins, Trey Harris, a really dynamic attack that can do a little bit of everything. They can do a little bit of everything really well. You know, I mean, you have the lethal guy on the outside and Trey Harris, who, look, we saw what Luther Burden did last week. He was kind of taken out of the game. They figured out how to beat him. He's more of a slot guy. Trey Harris is more of a guy on the edge. He has that great size, 6'2". He can really body some people. I mean, he scored multiple touchdowns multiple times this year. I think he had 215 yards last week. I mean, he's just an incredible performer. Quinshon Judkins if you thought Cody Schrader was going to be a tough player, Quinshon Judkins takes it to the next level. He might be the best running back in the SEC. And Jackson Dart in particular, that's who I'm zeroing in on in particular, because he has the skill set in particular that could really, really hurt a Georgia defense. He can make plays with his legs. He can extend plays and really cause some problems and reach to the boundary. And then on top of that, he can hit his targets down the field. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's very efficient, and he's got the arm strength to make the plays that matter. So Ole Miss really, really can cause some problems for Georgia.
Yeah, I don't disagree with too much of what you said, but I will say this. I just think it's a bad matchup. I think the one thing Georgia that I'm super confident in their ability to do is stop the run. Now, we're talking about Quinshon Judkins and his run. I'm not talking about Jackson Dart. And this is where it gets to, as you mentioned, a little bit of a wild card here. It's one of those games. And look, we said Jaden Daniels had to have it against Alabama. He's got to have one of those superhuman efforts. And I do think that potential is there for Jackson Dart. I'm not overly expecting it to happen, but there is that potential. It's a tough environment. It's on the road. Ole Miss, I do not trust on the road. And I just think it's a bad matchup. I will say this. Ole Miss can really get after the quarterback on defense. And I'm interested to see, with 31 sacks on the season, what they can do against a Georgia protection scheme that did allow 3 sacks a week ago. And look, you get some sacks. Maybe one of those turns into a turnover. Maybe it turns into speeding Carson Beck up over the course of the game. That could turn into an interception. Stuff like that matters, even if it's not necessarily on the stat sheet. I am interested to see how they do defensively. I have some real concerns about Ole Miss being able to crack the, let's say, 24-point barrier. And it's going to be very tough at the rate that this Georgia offense is humming, with or without Brock Bowers, which is its own little discussion. I don't see them being held under 24 points in this game. So it's going to be very interesting to see how high Ole Miss can get. And I agree with what you said. It's got to be Jackson Dart, and it's got to be him with his legs. And I know that's like a cop-out answer for like every running quarterback has to do it with his legs, but like there's a reason they're running quarterbacks, and there's a reason that he has this many rushing touchdowns, 7 of them on the season. That's how he beats teams. It went away against Alabama. It wasn't enough. And you know what happened? They weren't even competitive. It was not a close game. He's got to do more of that against Georgia, or I expect a very similar situation on the road.
Yeah, and really that's the biggest thing. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is Jackson Dart.
Yeah.
Brock Bowers, I will say, I just want to, for the record, as of right now, as of the recording Wednesday evening, Brock Bowers is practicing. Brock Bowers has a good shot of playing.
We've seen all the articles. Just your gut feeling, because I don't think he's playing.
I think he's going to play.
Okay.
He will suit up. He's not going to be a major impact type of player.
Not.
And Dogs HQ insider Rusty Manziel tweeted at one point, he said, if he suits up and plays on Saturday, that would have been 26 days post-surgery.
And Tua was back in 27.
Tua Tagovailoa, he had the same surgery. He was back in 27 days, and he was starting quarterback for Alabama.
No, the timeline is fair. Like
the timeline makes sense.
I just don't think
it's also superhuman. Let's put it that way.
It's too big a risk, in my opinion. That's all.
It may not be worth it, but he might suit up and play. That doesn't mean he's going to be a major factor in the game. He might just do it just to get some reps and then get him out.
Right. Fair enough.
But we'll see what happens there. The last thing I will say on this game, this is going to be a massive game with major implications to top 10 programs. How does Ole Miss look on the road? They have not been a very effective road team. 25 points per game this year on the road versus 40.2 at home against FBS opponents.
Yeah,
I'm not
good
including
stat.
that Mercer game where they go off and scored
That's a good
77
stat.
points. I'm not
Yeah.
including that. 40.2 at home versus 25 on the road. I got to see more. I got to see more. And a lot of that has to do with the 8 penalties per game for 62 yards on average. That is, you do that against Georgia. This is not a Georgia team that's going to beat itself. They do
Right.
force you into making mistakes. And you do that by getting behind the chains, not allowing Quinjon Judkins. That's where he's very important in this. Stay ahead of the chains, because I think this is going to be a 4-down offense for Ole Miss. You get into plus territory, they're going to be attempting they have 4 attempts. They're not punting. They're not kicking field goals. They understand how this game is going to be. They're going to need to score points. It's just kind of the guy that Lane Kiffin is just in general too. But you can't do that if you're having penalties. You can't do that if you're turning the ball over. And I just need to see more from Lane Kiffin and company. He has not been very effective in these massive games with big time implications. Maybe that game against LSU was where they turned a corner, because that was really the first game that I think we saw Ole Miss show up in a big time game that everybody had their eyes on it and were watching, and Lane Kiffin and company showed up and played to the highest level. Now, you're not going to beat this Georgia team if you're allowing them to score 45 plus points.
Right.
That's not happening. But can he win this style of play? I don't know. We haven't seen Lane Kiffin do it. The time that we saw him this year, he goes on the road, plays Alabama, loses that game 24-10. But we've never seen Lane Kiffin versus Kirby Smart. So this is going to be a first edition of that. I think it's going to be very interesting. Two Nick Saban apprentices playing each other for the first time. So I'm very excited to see that game. Abe, did you have any more thoughts on this one?
Just final thought in regards to Georgia. At some point, you have to stop denying their resume. If they win this game, they're jumping Ohio State. We'll get more into that into Mondays. Yeah, we'll talk more about that on Monday's episode of College Football Overtime. But at some point, enough with Ohio State's 2 wins. Georgia's resume is building and continues to build if they are able to win this game.
I will contend that right now they're the best team in the country. I think they have an opportunity.
I still want to see
just like last week.
Yeah.
They have a great opportunity to, and they're playing at home.
Yeah,
they're playing at home, and I think that the crowd's going to be in it and be a major factor for them in this game. Vanderbilt at South Carolina. I don't have too many thoughts on this game, just in particular. South Carolina looking to get bowl eligible. They need a win out down the stretch. They had a bit of a stumbling block last week against Jacksonville State, but they overcome that with a strong fourth quarter performance. I don't foresee too many issues with Vanderbilt this week. Do you have any thoughts here?
I don't think Shane Beamer's getting fired just yet, but lose this game and we'll find out just how hot that seat gets. That's all I'll say. Last week, as you mentioned, was not a good look. This is just another game. If you want to keep your job, you have to win this game at home against Vanderbilt. As simple as that.
Yep, absolutely. And Auburn and Arkansas, both teams coming off of big wins.
Yeah.
I think they're trending in different directions, per se. I still don't know if Sam Pittman has job security over there in Arkansas. I think of any coach right now, you talked about job security with Shane Beamer. I think Sam Pittman is the hottest seat in the SEC right now.
Yeah, sure.
You cannot afford to lose a game to Auburn right now. This is an Auburn team this is going to be the worst that they're likely going to be over the next couple of years.
Right.
Hugh Freeze still doesn't have a quarterback. I'm still not fully convinced. The defense is going to be pretty good. Did you learn anything from Arkansas last week?
Yeah, I think they're simplifying things on offense. Obviously, they switched play callers on the offensive side of the ball, and I think they're letting KJ Jefferson be KJ Jefferson. You did get a couple of appearances from Rocket Sanders, who had been hurt for nearly a month. So I do think they're working through some things. Is it enough to be competitive in this game? I'll be honest, Garrett, I think it is. I think this is a Arkansas team that is fighting for their coach's job. And for some certain players fighting for their legacies. I mean, there was a time where KJ Jefferson had a legacy that could have been discussed as among the best in Arkansas history. He was trending that way. Now it's trended the other way. But I liked what I saw from Arkansas. Obviously didn't like the Florida aspect of it a week ago, but I did like what I saw from Arkansas. They did look better on offense. Now it's just whether that carries over to a second week.
Yeah. And both teams are really looking to make a statement up on this win. Or this week. How are they looking as far as, let me look at this. I should have had that ready before I made any statements. Arkansas would need to win out to reach a bowl game, which if you do that, I think we might have a different conversation if you're saying Pittman, just based off of the turnaround alone. Auburn, one more win, and they will get back into bowl eligibility. They missed it last year, obviously with the firing of your head coach and everything else. But I think Hugh Freeze, if you get your guys back to, I don't know, a 7-5 record, which I think is very well within striking range, that's a slam dunk of a first season if you're Hugh Freeze, right along the lines of what we predicted here on this show. And that's a great first season. But if you're Arkansas, you're just scratching and clawing right now, trying to fight for your jobs and really the rest of your season. So Auburn has nothing to lose. Arkansas, not quite so much, but that should make for a very interesting football game. But you mentioned the game last week, Florida. They're going on the road playing at LSU, the number 19 team in the country. I'm more interested in what LSU, I'll let you speak on the Florida side of it. But what if Jaden Daniels doesn't suit up?
That's
what
the
if
question.
He is sidelined?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the biggest question mark. Garrett Nussmeier, we've seen him in spurts. He reminds me of what DJ Uiagalelei was for Trevor Lawrence in short appearances and in short bursts. He came out of the field and throws for 500 yards. Just looks like a freak of nature. You saw him in the SEC title game when he came in and spelled a banged up Jaden Daniels against Georgia. And I think that had as much to do with Georgia taking their foot off the gas, up 40 points or something at the time. But he looked good, and he has shown the ability to throw the ball down the field very effectively. And I think you've got the tools on the outside to really cause some problems. I don't really see a massive step back necessarily, at least on a week-to-week basis. I mean, Jaden Daniels, of course, can do everything with his legs, and that's really the biggest boon for the offense just in general. But Garrett Nussmeier is going to be able to do everything with his arm and then some that Jaden Daniels can. And then I also want to watch the rushing attack. Logan Diggs, he struggled last week, 24 yards on the ground. That was one of the biggest reasons why they struggled down the stretch in that game, because Jaden Daniels had to do everything, and that's why he got banged up eventually down the stretch. You can't take that many hits. I know we're not going to discuss the hit on this podcast, not here. You've done enough of that. We've seen enough of that on social media. We're not going to do it here on this podcast. But I'll leave you to the Florida side. What does a win mean for them in this game?
Yeah, well, obviously a win is because of losing a week ago, their bowl eligibility is at real risk. Which would look, I don't think we're putting a nail in a coffin. I'm not on that boat in terms of Napier, but you've got Missouri and Florida State still on the schedule. You had to find a win somewhere. It should have been against Arkansas. We discussed that, and it wasn't. I disagree with you about LSU. I think this is all about Jaden Daniels. If Jaden Daniels plays and is himself, I don't think Florida has a shot. I think they have a shot with Nussmeier. I really do. Now, look, there's also a world where Nussmeier, as you said, flips it around to Neighbors and Thomas and forget about it. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. But there's also a world where Florida can get after the passer a good bit. There's a world where they're able to limit the rest of the offense. And I think just the confidence, like mentally, I know players and coaches never admit, like, we don't think we can win this game if so-and-so plays. There is that. Like it's human nature. Sure. For Florida, if Jaden Daniels plays, I don't think you can win this game. If it's the other way, though, I think there's a confidence level that could come from facing a backup quarterback that could boost their opportunities. So I think it's all about Jaden Daniels. If he plays, LSU wins. If he doesn't play, I think for both sides, game on.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting game. What time is that one coming on? Is that
that game's at 7:30 SEC?
7:30. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So but we've seen crazy things happen in this rivalry. We had a shoegate at one point. That was probably one of the more interesting things that have happened in college football over the last couple of years. But look, this should make for a very interesting contest just in general. Last one in the SEC, and then we'll move on to the ACC. Mississippi State at Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a different team at home. I think they're playing a team that they should absolutely beat in Mississippi State. They've always played better at home. That's really my biggest thought there. They should win this one pretty comfortably after just a really frustrating loss last week. That was just a tough game for them just in general, but they should handle this one.
Yeah, it's interesting that we were here. I thought that A&M maybe would go the other way depending, but it's just another game where Jimbo is just holding off the outside noise. You should be able to win this game, and you don't have to hear that much about job security for another week. I think that's what happens this week. But, I think he's actually, considering where I thought this season could go for them, he's done a pretty decent job of holding off all that stuff, especially when you had to deal with a midseason quarterback injury and using your backup the rest of the way. So
yeah, I mean, they're currently sitting at 5-4. You win this game, you're 6-4. Abilene Christian, you better not lose that game. So 7-4, you're looking at an 8-4 potential. But you have to finish on the road against LSU in Death Valley, and that's going to be a difficult contest for them, just in general. But you should win. You should win this game, and I think you nailed it pretty effectively. He staves off elimination, and he can get into next season, and then now he doesn't have to play in the vaunted SEC West. Now you do have old rivals coming into town, Texas and Oklahoma. That's for next year's discussion.
Yeah, let next year be next year. He's
let next year be next year. But it appears to me that he has staved off elimination, at least for now. Mississippi State, though, they are trending in the wrong direction. First year of Zach Arnett, they really just don't have an identity to me. I don't know who they are. You've lost back-to-back weeks of just mind-numbingly tough football where you just haven't been very good. You have Kentucky at home. It was just an ugly game. I watched a little bit of that one. And then you had the road game against Auburn, which I thought was really your best opportunity to get a win outside of the obvious one where you travel to beat Arkansas and probably the ugliest football game of the season this year to this point. But you won 7-3, so that's all that really counts. But hey, let's move into the ACC rather, because we have another really important game. And this one is coming up on Thursday, Virginia at Louisville. I'll keep my thoughts on this one pretty brief, just in general. This is a game that you should absolutely win if you're Louisville. I think Virginia got exposed a bit last week. Louisville plays exceptionally better when they're at home. They have a very explosive offense. They're a one-loss team trying to build some credibility for the College Football Playoff Committee right now as they traverse their way down to an ACC title game, a looming matchup with Florida State. Virginia is not a team that you can take lightly. Virginia is also a team that lost its starting quarterback, Tony Muskett, against Georgia Tech. His status is still up in the air. I haven't heard anything. I think it was a concussion, but I don't know his status coming into this game. But it's a short week because this game's going to be played on Thursday, which leads me to believe that he's not going to be ready to go. But they do Malik Washington guys on the outside. They could cause some problems for Louisville, I will say. I just don't know if they have the firepower to really run with Louisville if Louisville gets up and going.
Look, it's a 2-7 team with one of the wins being over William and Mary. And so I know you look back on that that game over North Carolina and what the heck happened here for Virginia. But you're right. Louisville has no business in this game being competitive based on what we've seen from both teams, based on the quarterback situation, based on it being a short week, all of the things that go into this game. I do expect Louisville to be rather impressive as they try and get any sort of statement out to the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yeah, and this is a really important game for them just for the aforementioned reason. Look, you gotta clinch the ACC. I think you do that with a win here because the only other people behind them right now, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, believe it or not, then you have the Duke Blue Devils and the North Carolina Tar Heels. Boston College, NC State, they're still in there. I actually don't know the head-to-heads here, but you've beaten Duke, you've beaten Virginia Tech if you're Louisville. So you're only and you've beaten Georgia Tech. So you win here and you all but clinch your trip to Charlotte for the ACC title game. But you need to do it convincingly because you need to start showing off and showing some firepower that you belong in the college football playoff. They got a long way to go. It'll be very difficult, but look, you can't do that if you don't beat the teams that you're supposed to beat down the stretch. So win on Thursday, and figure the rest out. Miami, they go and do just one of the best rivalries, I will say, that a lot of people outside of the state of Florida don't fully appreciate. Miami and Florida State, these two teams hate each other. They, at least the fan bases, despise each other. And they're going on the road. The Mario Cristobal roller coaster of a season has just continued to go up and down and the twisty curly cues and everything else. They lose to NC State after having just an awesome win against Clemson. Turnovers have continued to be an issue. They had 4 last week. Tyler Van Dyke of the offense did. But this is a rivalry game, Abe. And I don't know about you. I love rivalry games because anything can happen on the football field on those Saturday night games.
Yeah, I mean, the question for me is because I think Florida State is much better
Sure.
than Miami, and I think Mario Cristobal's refusal to bench Tyler Van Dyke is going to end up costing his team any semblance of competency the remainder of the way. He's been terrible, just absolutely dreadful. I don't know if he's got the yips or he's in his own head. I don't know what's going on. It's not the guy we thought could be one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC this year. I'll say this. There are some real questions about Florida State's health. They've got to get some
Yeah.
playmakers back. They missed 4 key wide receivers a week ago. Still got the job done quite impressively. Jordan Travis has been outstanding in recent weeks, and Florida State has really poured it on some lesser opponents, and I expect them to do the same if they can get guys like Coleman and Wilson back healthy for this game. And it might have been a situation where they knew they'd win a week ago, and they were resting the guys, making sure they can get as close to 100% as possible for this this showdown. But I'll be honest, I don't know what a path to victory is for Miami if Florida State's healthy. I really don't.
I'm not quite so bullish on Florida State here. Miami is a plenty talented football team. We've seen what they can do when they play at a high level. Jordan Travis, you're going to have to affect the quarterback. You're going to have to knock him off his spot, make him uncomfortable. No real, teams haven't really been able to do that effectively. Miami might be able to do that. They've got a decent. The defense is pretty good. They have one of the best safety tandems in the ACC. The secondary is strong. It just all comes down to Tyler Van Dyke for me. You can't turn the ball over, and he tries to play Superman too much, and he makes bad decisions with the football, and like bad things happen when you do things like that. And I think Miami has a good opportunity here. If they play their best game, they can absolutely give Florida State a good game. Will that be enough? I don't know. If Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson aren't healthy, then I think it potentially could be, because if you're like Florida State and you don't have your top wide receivers here, I think that puts you in a really difficult spot. Now, they are able to run the ball effectively. That's been one aspect of their game, which I'd say we don't talk enough about, is the fact that they run the ball really well. But if you don't have those top end wide receivers, then I think that really puts you in a bad spot. Is that going to be enough for Miami to pull off an upset? I don't know. I think they didn't absolutely make this a very interesting game at the very least. I think the line is like what, plus 15.5 or something like that. I'd be comfortable taking the points there. Would I take the Miami money line? I don't think so. I think if you're willing to ride that roller coaster that's Mario Cristobal, then go for it. But I don't know if I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, 3 interceptions for Van Dyke a week ago in a very, very poor loss to NC State. And I'm just totally off. Just totally off on him. I don't know why you're sticking with him as opposed to Emory Williams, who did lead you to that win against Clemson. That would be my decision. I've seen other Miami fans be kind of befuddled by the fact that they're just sticking with this guy. But again, I just do think it comes down to the Florida State playmakers. If they're healthy, I think this is pretty cut and dried. If they're not, I think it is. It's kind of like the Florida LSU situation. If Jaden Daniels is playing, forget about it. If he's not, game on. I think if Coleman and Wilson are playing, forget about it. If they're not, though, game on.
Yeah, I think it could be a very sneakily good game.
Yeah.
The nooner on ABC, Georgia Tech travels to Death Valley, the other Death Valley, to go play Clemson. The high-flying Georgia Tech offense, of course, had the huge game against Tony Muskett and the Virginia Cavaliers last week, scored 45 points. I'd say their best four-quarter performance of the season. Now they get the stout Clemson defense, which for all of the shortcomings that the offense has had, dealing with fumbles and turnovers and everything else, the defense has still been pretty effective. You know, I mean, we saw what they just did to Notre Dame last week. I think they might have turned a corner. So you have two teams who I'd say are playing good football right now. Clemson, of course, has had the woes. Of course, you have the ups and downs of the first back-to-back losses for Dabo Swinney since 2011. But he turns around and he answers for Tyler from Spartanburg with a big resounding win against Notre Dame. Now you have a high-flying offense, which I think is a better offense at Georgia Tech than what you saw against Notre Dame. The biggest thing for me, can Clemson hold on to the football? And then can Haynes King, I'll just say this, a better way of saying this. Who wins the turnover battle? Haynes King he's for all of the goods and the highs and everything else, he does have a propensity to throw interceptions. Not all of them are his fault. I can't blame all at the quarterback's feet. but he has had some interceptions that have really cost Georgia Tech a couple of games so far this season. But then Clemson, they put the ball on the ground just too often. Phil Maffa, who I'm sure you're going to discuss in the presence of Will Shipley, the starter who has been practicing this week. He's at the non-contact jersey. We'll see what he does on Saturday and if he suits up. I think he's going to be a game-time decision, but I assume he'll go. Phil Maffa had 36 carries last week, 185 yards. Great game. But he had, I think, 2 fumbles in that game. Or maybe he had 3 fumbles. Only lost 1 of them. So I think that's going to be a really important aspect to this game. Who wins the turnover battle? Can Georgia Tech keep going against a really high-flying Clemson defense? It's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm normally not one who leans this way. Normally, I do like to give teams their flowers after a win. I don't think Clemson was very good a week ago. I think Sam Hartman and Notre Dame were that bad. I was not impressed. It's not that I wasn't unimpressed with Clemson. I just think it was more about how bad Sam Hartman was for whatever reason than Clemson.
Yeah.
Look, 2 of their scoring drives were one of them was 8 plays, 18 yards, and one of them was a couple plays for a -1 yard in which they kicked the field goal. The turnovers really mattered in this game in regards to Notre Dame. So I look at it that way. Now, that being said, I think it's safe to say, at least my opinion, Clemson is still a better team than Georgia Tech. Clemson is at home, which we know has actually been good for Tech going on the road. But you laid out a lot of the things. Clemson can do a pretty good job stopping the run. Clemson can run the ball a fair amount. If those 2 things happen and it's put on the shoulders of Haynes King, it's going to be tough. Doesn't mean they can't do it. We've seen Haynes King have some real big games, but a lot of those games have been supported by the run game. So that's going to be the key for me. Who runs the ball? Probably, if it's competitive in terms of who runs the ball, but if one team has a big advantage, I would look at that team to win. But I'm just not going to overreact in this week to how Clemson was able to beat Notre Dame. This was a rare, big misstep for Sam Hartman. I don't know what went on there, but he cost the Irish the game a week ago.
It was a pretty bad game, just in general. It was kind of sloppy. It's hard to take something from it. Sam Hartman's been a frustrating player just in general this year, Abe. In the biggest games, he just hasn't really shown up. And maybe that's just who he is. Some guys are great when the lights aren't on and then the lights pop on and then you just sort of fall asleep or maybe you just shrink. And I'm not saying that's what he's done, but this season, it's been pretty consistent. And I was kind of frustrated with him too, because I say that about Sam Hartman, just you looked really good in 2 consecutive weeks. And then, Notre Dame, just in general, and then you just fall flat in this game. And I wonder if we could see something similar for Georgia Tech. Look, they've won 2 games in a row for only the second time since 2018. And if they win on Saturday, this would be the first time they've won 3 consecutive games since 2018. So this is not a Georgia Tech team that's really found a lot of success. And I want to see what Brent Key can do. He's got that program moving, I think, in the right direction. They've got good habits and everything else. And I'm not going to get into too much of that here, but I think this is a good football team. I think that I think it's a 15-point spread, 14.5 points. That's almost a good spot if you're Brent Key. I know you mentioned it. He's 6-1 on the road against ACC opponents when he's an underdog. 6-1. And he's just very impressive in those roles. He's looked really good. The team looked really good against North Carolina. Granted, that was at home. And then you look even better last week. It looked like they finally built on some of that momentum. I want to see them do that early in this game. I think you're going to figure out what's going to happen in this game very early on, because Clemson is a good enough team that they can pile on to somebody very quickly. And if you see a Georgia Tech team come in here and just sort of spook them, those fans might turn on Clemson. I said this last week. Didn't really happen that way. It actually happened the opposite. Clemson started fast in that game, and they really were able to pile it on and hold on for dear life down the stretch. Georgia Tech is a much better offense, I'd say. So this will be very interesting. I got my eyes on this one just in particular. But let's move on. Virginia Tech at Boston College. These are 2 teams who I think are both trending up in the ACC. Both have had surprisingly better seasons. Virginia Tech's coming off the loss last week. They kind of crashed down to earth. But Boston College became bowl eligible. And they've had just a true turnaround to their season.
Yeah, I'm in on Boston College. I'm in on their quarterback, Castellanos. I saw a lot of him, obviously, in the Georgia Tech game, but I just think he's an outstanding kind of overlooked. I mean, look, he's not a top of the conference guy. He's a good weapon for a mid-tier team, and that's what Boston College is. I think he is enough to get them a win at home over Virginia Tech.
I think that should be a good game. Robichaux's another guy who I'm going to be watching in that game. I think the rushing attack is just going to be too much. Virginia Tech is a little bit of fool's gold for me just in general, but they've had a better season, I'll admit, than I fully expected earlier in the season. NC State, they go on the road and they are going to be playing Wake Forest. NC State's in an interesting spot because they just had the big win on Saturday after they get the win over Clemson. Now you're losing your quarterback. MJ Morris suddenly decided to redshirt for the remainder of the 2023 season after he led the team to the back-to-back wins. He had 719 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions in 4 starts. He's from Carrollton, Georgia, so he's a Georgia boy. Brennan Armstrong, he is the UVA transfer. He's going to be coming in. He's going to be the favorite. Had a big performance against Miami last week, by the way. They brought him in. He ended up leading the team in rushing in that one, believe it or not. So, I mean, he has some athleticism, but it's just a weird spot if you're NC State. And how do they respond? That's really my biggest question for them.
Yeah, it is an odd situation. I actually like Brendan Armstrong. I thought he would be a little bit better just throughout the course of the season. I liked him as a transfer coming in, and he just didn't get it done early on. Maybe, sitting back and watching and getting the offense has figured a couple things out. I just think at the end of the day, though, they're a better team than Wake Forest. This is not a very competitive Wake Forest team. They are at home. We do get weird things happening on the CW. But I think even with the quarterback change that NC State's got more than enough to get this thing done.
Dave Doran's just continuing his run of 8-4 football. That's really just the Doran special up there. In Raleigh, North Carolina. Pittsburgh at Syracuse. I don't know what to expect really in this game. Dino Babers is just sort of stumbling right now. The Syracuse Orange are 0-5 in conference play after starting 4-0 out of conference. And it has just been a disaster of a second half of the season for Syracuse. But at the same time, Pat Narduzzi in Pittsburgh looks like they've quit on Narduzzi. I don't, based off of the comments and everything else that were made last week or 2 weeks ago after the game, they played a lot better against Florida State than I fully expected them to. But I really have no feel on this game. But these are two teams. Pittsburgh, I guess they're out on bowl eligibility, so I don't really know what to expect in this game. But Syracuse, they're still technically alive if you're looking for bowl eligibility. They just need 3. They need to go undefeated down the stretch. I don't think that's going to happen, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Florida State game's a little bit of misleading because of all the injuries to the offensive playmakers on Florida State. They put up 24. Jordan Travis was pretty efficient. They played it pretty close to the vest, though. And I think that could have looked like the Notre Dame game the week before where it's a 58-7 type of affair had they had those playmakers. I'm with you. Look, Syracuse has lost, 5 in a row now? But I do think they have enough to get this win. It does feel like the Pitt ride is over. I agree with you, which makes the loss for Louisville so much tougher to explain. That's really what you take a wild glance at out of Pittsburgh's schedule. It's like, all right, I understand the rest of their schedule. This is the one that doesn't make sense. But I think Syracuse can end their losing streak and maybe try and salvage the season a little bit on Saturday.
Abe will finish with the Tobacco Road rivalry. Duke at North Carolina.
I don't even have a lot to say about this game, except I wish it mattered more. I'll be honest, that's kind of like, man, it felt like 3 weeks ago we were like, winner of this could be undefeated and heading to the ACC championship game. And now it's like, I don't really even care who wins. Like that's frustrating. Riley Leonard never got back to full health. No. He just never got back. And UNC's offense has been up and down with Tez Walker returning. I still think they have enough firepower with Drake May. So I'll take them, but it's one of those like not all time. That's certainly overstating, but it's like a what could have been game for this season because it looks like that's where we were headed and it's just not anymore.
Yeah, and it's a frustrating outcome for both of these teams.
Yeah.
I think, and that's what look, it's what could have been because these are two good teams. I think they're two well-coached teams. Both teams could do a lot of things well, but if Riley Leonard stayed healthy, I think we're talking about a different Duke team. And then inexplicably, if North Carolina just stuck to their identity a little bit better and tried not to get so unnecessarily creative like they did at times, like they did against their loss against Georgia Tech, their loss to Virginia, then we could be talking about a different North Carolina team who has, albeit snuck back up into the top 25. They're sitting pretty right there at 24 after their win against Campbell, because that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. That's the resume builder, I guess, is the win against the Camels. But either way, let's move on because we have a lot of big games to get across the nation, and that's really what we're going to discuss right here. And I do want to start with one of the biggest games of the week, one of the biggest games of the year, Michigan at Penn State. And I feel like we've almost buried the lead by bringing it up this late in the show, but I do want to get into it because it is a really important game. I talked earlier about the game Tennessee and Missouri being about which quarterback there is relied upon the least. I think this is going to be one of those games where it's going to come down to J.J. McCarthy and Drew Aller. That is the biggest thing for me. If whoever has the best game between those two, I think is really going to define what happens in this game. 418 yards rushing for Michigan in this one last year. I do not expect that to be the case this year. I'd be surprised really if they eclipse 150 yards in this game. 100 yards, I could see that happening just because, Blake Corum's having a magnificent season, 649 yards on the ground, 5.2 yards per carry. But I have a lot of questions for Michigan just in general, and a lot of them aren't on the talent or their ability. It's what did they do in their first real test of the season? Because we haven't seen what they look like against top-end competition at all this season. The best teams they've played are Rutgers and UNLV, and they're doing a great job. Look, they're winning by an average margin of victory of 34 points. But at the end of the day, it's hard to gauge what they really are. Are those numbers inflated, Abe? I don't know. We'll find out on Saturday.
Yeah, it's finally time that we get Michigan a test. I 100% agree. We've been waiting for it. We've been trying to gauge, as you mentioned. All right, the offensive numbers, the defensive numbers is complete domination, but against who? It's finally time that we see it against someone, and it's a tough opponent. It is a road game to Penn State. And look, Drew Aller threw for 240 yards while putting up 51 points a week ago on the road against Maryland. That's the most yards he had thrown for since the first week of the season. So he may be peaking at the right time, but it's just about how much help he can get. I mean, how much can he possibly get? I know it's not a big bin against hardly anyone. Yeah. I unequivocally believe in this Michigan run defense, though. Of all the other aspects, if you want to pick apart what will and won't stick, I think the Michigan run defense is legitimate. It's going to be very, very tough for Allen and company to get it going on the ground. So you're asking a lot of Drew Aller, and I think that's just a disaster waiting to happen, if I'm being honest. I think Michigan is good. I think Michigan's legitimate. I think Michigan goes into Penn State and wins this game. The great part about this is I could be so easily wrong because we just haven't seen it against anyone. And I think it's justifiable to think the way I think and be wildly wrong. Maybe this Penn State offense cuts them open. Maybe they get pushed around on the line of scrimmage. Maybe they get shut down and J.J. McCarthy never even gets his Heisman campaign kick-started. Those are all real legitimate possibilities. I don't think that's the case. But when you're talking about a team that really has not been tested, those are legitimate possibilities. And so that's what's got me so excited for this game. It is tough to pick because we just don't really know what's real, what sticks, and what doesn't for Michigan on offense and defense. But that's what's got me so juiced up about this one is just finally getting to find out. And look, Michigan's been ranked number 3 in the college football playoff rankings. I had them earlier in the season ranked number 1 because of overall domination. Sure. I think we find out on Saturday if that is legitimate, if what we've seen on both sides of the ball is legitimate. And I'm just ready for it. I really am. And then on the Penn State side, it's just, are you ever going to get over the hump? We had the same discussion with Ohio State and James Franklin. Like, are you ever going to beat one of these two teams? You got it at home. You got a top 12 team here. If not now, when sort of situation. So you're going back to the same storylines, albeit at home. We'll see how that plays out there for the Nittany Lions and head coach James Franklin.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that it's just a shame that it's happening at noon instead of at 8:00. I really wish that this would have been a whiteout game. Oh, man, that would have been a lot of fun just in general. But big noon kickoff over there on Fox. James Franklin, I think, takes a little bit too much criticism here, too. I saw this on Twitter. He's 3-16 against top 10 teams. Of course, we mentioned that when they played Ohio State. It was a massive storyline. And then people are like, oh, he's 3-16 versus top 10 teams. Oh, that means he's overrated, right? Well, he was only favored in one of those games. So it's more along the lines. I think someone mentioned that he's, I'd say, more perfectly rated than he is anything else. He was only favored in one of those games, and he won two of the games that he was not supposed to win. So he's losing the games he's supposed to and winning the games that he is supposed to. And I mean, I just want to see him win this game and do something he's not supposed to do. And I think that all comes down, like I said, to Drew Aller. You have to keep him safe because in that game against Ohio State, he was terrorized. He was sacked 4 times, but he was pressured throughout the game. And it really threw off everything because you could not protect him. And that goes into running the ball. You need to be able to run the ball more effectively. That's going to be a massive test for them. I don't know if they're really going to be able to run against this Michigan front seven, like you mentioned, but Katrin Allen, Nicholas Singleton, those are two guys who need to step up and have good games. But Drew Aller, when he's throwing from a clean pocket, he's 75%, 636 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. You go back to that Ohio State game where he was sacked 4 times and pressured throughout the day, 42%, 191 yards, and the 1 touchdown. Didn't make any catastrophic errors, I would say, but he wasn't a reason that they found any success on offense. And look, you need to make plays. And I think playing at home is going to help you a lot in this contest. And I'm very interested to see what happens in this. Can they win? I think they absolutely can win. I will save my pick for Saturday on college football game time. Find it anywhere on the Audacy app. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to continue that discussion, but we're going to zip through some of these other games that are happening across the nation. Arizona at Colorado. I think that these are two programs trending in completely different directions. Colorado is not going the right direction right now. They just made a coordinator change, albeit a weird one and kind of an interesting one. Didn't really see that boost. It was my upset special last week, and that didn't really play out. But now Arizona, they're trending and playing some of their best football. They've won 3 games in a row against ranked opponents. I mean, look, they've done fantastic work. Noah Fifita, he had 300 yards last week against a really good UCLA defense. And look, you win 27-10 against a good UCLA team who a lot of people had playing in the Pac-12 title game at the beginning of the season. Arizona's looking like a really good team right now.
Yeah, this is an interesting one to me, Garrett, because I think people have gotten a little too, look, early in the season, people obviously went way too far to one side in Colorado. Sure. I actually think they've swung the wrong way now, they're not the wrong way, but too far the wrong way. I think this is a Colorado team that's actually been relatively competitive the last 2 weeks against ranked teams. They covered against UCLA. They covered against Oregon State. That was a very close game. You mentioned the switch at coordinator. And are we now flying a little Icarus style for Arizona where they're flying and we've shifted on them? They're a little too close. I think this is a spot and probably, in my opinion, the last spot for Dion to make a statement and grab one of those types of wins that we saw early on in the season. Because I don't think at Utah at the end of the season is the one for them. I think that's too tough of a matchup. This one I think is realistic though. And if we're going to look at the Dion taking down another ranked opponent, this I think is realistic. You are at home. You have played well. You did lose. You're not arguing that. They lost the last 2 games, but they've been competitive against really good Pac-12 teams. And I don't think a lot of people expected them to even be competitive against. Can they be more than just competitive in this one? That's the question for me. I actually am interested in this one. I'm not saying they will win, but I think they can. And it's like you said, 2 teams that have kind of flipped. I'm interested to see if they flip back after this one.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a very interesting game. I think he nailed it, honestly. Colorado has an opportunity to do something and end the season on a high note here with the very difficult stretch in the Pac-12, which has just continued to be the best conference in college football. 7 teams have 6 wins or more at this point. And look, they're a tough squad, but we're going to keep it out there in the Pac-12 because Utah is going on the road to play Washington, the second massive game with big stakes that they have played in consecutive weeks. Last week, we saw them play USC and really put the pedal to the metal on offense. 52 points scored for them. They did allow 42 points, but that's a tough USC opponent. This week, you have the inverse. You have a team that can't really play much offense and plays great defense. It's very interesting because the types of teams you have out there in the Pac-12 are so interesting because they change from week to week, it seems like, because Utah, they just had probably their best offensive performance of the season. They scored 55 points against Arizona State. I don't know if that's necessarily reflective of a change in philosophy or maybe they found something that works. I don't think that's the case necessarily. Washington and Utah, this is going to be a great game.
Yeah, and that last week's result, as you mentioned, 55 points, I'm trying to determine if that was the anomaly or if it's some sort of new norm. And obviously level of opponent and quality of defense faced plays its own role here too. But for Washington, can you get into that 31 to 34 spot? Because once you get above that, you should feel pretty good that you're holding Utah below that. So we've seen some kind of, I don't want to say lame, that's not the right term, but a little bit of subpar efficiency from Washington. Is this a situation where they can get back to putting up into the 40s and 50s like we saw the first half of the season? And if so, they should be able to get this game. It's very important for them that this game was at home. They had a great atmosphere against Oregon. I think it played a real big role in winning that one. We'll see if it does the same. But, man, just no time to rest for those teams because you can't have any emotional letdown after a tough game against SC because Utah's coming in looking to spark the upset, looking to change a couple national title destinies. And so very, very interested in what Washington can do following that game. And like you said, was that a facade, the 55 points for Utah, or is that what their offense is? I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, and look, the Jekyll and Hyde of the Washington Huskies is just, it's got to come to an end. You have to find out. You have to build some more consistency. Otherwise, it will burn you.
Yeah.
You could get burned against a super physical Utah team. This is a team that likes to establish itself on the ground and punch you in the mouth. And I think we've really only seen that type of team against Washington once, and that was against Oregon. And they aren't as physical as Utah is. I'll just give Utah full credit. If you let them hang around, you saw what they did against USC. Maybe that's just their boogeyman, if you will. But if you let this Utah team hang around and you let them consistently just lean on you over the course of a game, they will wear you down and they will make you regret it. I mean, they've won back-to-back Pac-12 titles for a reason. Like they're one of the better teams in the conference consistently year in, year out. They're very well coached and they're going to be here ready to play. And I'm worried if you're Washington, just in general. I know you're playing at home, but you're playing you're just coming off of a very emotional game against USC. And then before that, it's just a spell of inconsistency. And I don't almost say that Oregon gifted you that game. I'm not trying to take anything away.
I'll say it.
I'm not going to try and take anything away from the win. A win's a win.
Sure.
But you have the game against California, Arizona. Like you have a lot of games that could have gone the other way. And I want to see more consistency, a full 4-quarter effort from Washington on Saturday. I'm a little worried with the type of opponent. Going undefeated in the Pac-12 this year is going to be very difficult. If they were going to lose a game, I think it's going to be this one on Saturday to a very good Utah team.
Look, everyone, if these two teams, Oregon and Washington, were to rematch, everyone's taking Oregon right now.
Yes.
It's up to Washington to play a game against a team like Utah to prove, hey, maybe you shouldn't all be on Oregon, right? And so that's what we're looking for. Go prove it against one of these teams that is a little bit better than SC. And just remind people why you were able to beat Oregon, why you're the number 5 team in the country. And by the way, if you win this game, you're probably the number 4 team in the country.
Speaking of USC and Oregon, those two teams play on Saturday at Oregon. And I think Oregon is they have an argument to be one of the best teams in the country. I think they have, ever since that loss to Washington, they have just consistently reeled off performance after performance after performance. Speaking of Utah, they punched them in the mouth before Utah could really do it. And that's really the recipe for Washington. Going back to them really quickly, jump on them, make them play catch up. And if you make them play catch up, then you're just going to find success down the stretch. And I think that's really their key there. Oregon and USC, this should be another game filled with fireworks, just like we saw last week. My biggest thing, if you're USC, how do you rebound? Like, how do you get back on track? Because they have just completely fallen on their face and just gotten punched in the mouth, and they have not been able to get off the mat.
Well, there's been a change, and that is defensive coordinator Alex Grinch is no longer the defensive coordinator there. And look, I don't know if that defense can be helped, but if it can be helped, a change was necessary. And so we're looking at that, right? And like, look, the offense is good. I mean, it's just how much better could you possibly get week to week on defense against a very strong Oregon offense? That's what we're looking at here. But I'm not ready to bury SC in this game yet, because I do think if something is noticeably different on defense, they can stay competitive because of the offense that they have. And look, Oregon has brought it every single week. They've looked great. And you just, at some point, there's going to be a flat game. They weren't flat against Washington. They lost. They had a couple of questionable decisions by their head coach, but they weren't flat in that game.
No.
It's very rare teams go an entire season without a flat game, all right? Georgia was not perfect a year ago. Record-wise, they were. But they were flat against Missouri a year ago.
They're flat against Auburn this year.
A couple this year. This year's different.
Yeah, sure.
But is there a game that Oregon does just for whatever reason look flat in? And if so, can whoever they are flat against beat them? I think the answer is if, and I'm not suggesting they will be flat, but if they are flat this week, I think USC's offense can beat them. They have played at such a high level every single week. You do wonder, at some point, is there a drop-off? Are you peaking too early? Those sorts of things. But if the answer is no, then they're going to control this game. But if they're flat, if the defense looks a little different for SC because of the defensive coordinator change, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you've seen crazier things happen in college football just in general because, I mean, look, you have rebounds. Teams play better sometimes when you have a new voice in the room. Maybe that is what USC needed.
Yeah.
But look, Oregon's playing at a high level right now. 63 points last week, 35 points against the really tough Utah defense. Only allowed 6 points in that game, too. You handle Washington State coming off of the loss against Washington. And, I mean, just based off of how Oregon is playing, I think you have two teams in two different spots. USC, if you come out, if you're Oregon and you're playing a USC team who has been struggling to get off the mat, I'll say that again. You come out and you punch them in the mouth early, you score some points. Yep. I don't think they're getting back up. I think it's over, and I think they quit. You just have to do that to them early in the game. And I think Dan Lanning's too good of a coach to let them falter in this game. I don't think they're peaking too early. I think they found their identity. I think they know who they are. I think they know how to run the ball with Bucky Irving. Look, you can do a lot of different things with this team, and they're very balanced. The most balanced team in the Pac-12. They can run the ball well. They can throw the ball well. Bo Nix doesn't make mistakes. The defense plays good football. USC is going to make some mistakes on defense. They're just a sieve. They can't be helped. I don't think that it's going to be enough. I think Oregon should continue to roll. But I do want to finish off with this last contest. Texas at TCU. I think Texas has the chance to lock down a spot in the Big 12 title game. Let me double check that before I say it.
Well, while you're looking into that, I'll say this is all about the quarterback for Texas. And I believe that Quinn Ewers does return this week. I know he was throwing a little bit in practice. There was a cryptic social media post of his as well. Malik Murphy showed me last week that things get a little dicey when he's back there. He's just not Quinn Ewers. So if Quinn Ewers can return in this game and not be too rusty, Texas should have no problem. This is not the TCU team that was competing for a national championship last year. They are well off of that form. Now, they're also not the same team that looked completely lost in the season opener against Colorado. No. But they are not as competitive as Texas. They should have no issues with this game, especially if Quinn Ewers returns, which, in my opinion, he will be out there.
No, and I think that Texas still needs to win another game or two before they officially clinch. They're right up there at the top of the standings in the Big 12, right there next to Oklahoma State, who had a huge game last week in Bedlam. went a big way in locking down Texas's ability to not have to face Oklahoma for a second time this year. Their only loss of the season. But they're in a big spot. They continue to roll. And I think I think they're the cream of the crop in the Big 12. They have a potential matchup looming with Oklahoma State. And I think that'd be a very interesting game just in general. But we talked about how the Pac-12 had a chance to just beat itself up and kill itself and knock itself out of contention. The Big 12 has a very good chance of doing that. I don't necessarily think that happens to Texas on Saturday, but look, just take care of business, keep rolling, and I think you control your own destiny for the most part in the college football playoff. Abe, did you have any more thoughts on this one or anything else in the Big 12?
No, I think we're all set there.
Awesome, man. So that's pretty much it. College football overtime. That's us. Your Week 11 preview. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman right here. We are going to have all of your reactions ready for you on Monday morning. So make sure you tune in right here every single Monday, every single Thursday, right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Make sure you're subscribing. Check us out on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you give us a follow. Make sure you throw us a follow on Twitter. He's at Abe Gordon. I'm at GChapATL. We are College Football Overtime. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you're subscribing. We'll catch you on Monday. All of the Week 11 reactions will be ready with you. So for Abe Gordon, I'm Garrett Chapman. I'll see y'all next time.